Okay, thank you, Melanie. So now, finally, can I invite all the speakers to the front and let's have a discussion session with any question or comment from our audience. Yes.
Okay. My name is Thomas Schmidt. I'm from the Embassy of Germany here in Washington. And I was fascinated by Mr. Fantom's sentence that it was no problem to delete the 3 million funding for his department, which he has asked for because later on the demand for the data was so huge that, and now that's my interpretation, that you could switch this demand for money from your department to the department for publicity or whatever. That means that or the reason why I'm asking is that public institutions very often are under a high pressure of cutting their budgets. And I think if we make that free for all, we lose a certain income source. And I wonder, is it really worthwhile to lose that source of income, or do you have some recommendations? What should be free, to whom it should be free? I leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to respond?
Okay. You want to collect some? You want to take them as they come? I didn't mean to give the impression that it was no problem to lose $3 million. If I did, then I apologize. I mean, what I was trying to say is that actually at that time, it was a big problem, and it was a big problem for my team. I think if somebody takes away that amount of money from your budget, you're definitely in a change process. What I was trying to say there was that I think what we've seen is that the value of making those data open and freely accessible has far exceeded the value that we would get from getting revenue. And I think that's the point that we're trying to make with open data. It's hard. I don't think it's easy. And I think many institutions struggle with exactly this issue, particularly in sort of times of austerity. I know OECD, for example, is another international institution which has struggled with exactly this issue, partly because a lot of the revenue that was received as a result of that was used to distribute the data, to pay for the costs of distribution. But one thing we have to recognize is that there are some efficiencies there, right? And but again, it's a difficult change. The people whose job it is to distribute that data are not going to like that change, because they're going to have to find something different to do. We had to find something different to do also, in many ways. But we had to go through a change, a managed change process. But in answer to your question, is there value in making data freely available as a public good when it is using public money to collect that data? My answer to that, and we can have a long debate about it, is that yes, it is, absolutely. And we've seen in the bank the value of that change. I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Johannes,
in the same direction, you should not only calculate the direct efficiency gains, because you have direct efficiency gains, you save a lot on dissemination costs, because others will disseminate your data for you if you make them open. So as we do with the World Bank data, the World Bank data are now easily disseminated also through the FAO website. So you get a direct efficiency. But then you also have to see the indirect gains that those people have, for which we say we are working for, who can get easily this data for their local goals. So 3 million seems a lot, but I think if you make a counter account how much efficiency you gain, I'm sure also this 3 millions will be will come up. We had a similar decision about AgroVoc, this thesaurus that we're using. We always said it's free only for non-commercial purposes, and for commercial purposes we made some strange arrangements of payment. It's not worth. It's not worth to do it. It's much more important that these data are used. So we are going for data now for a CC0 policy. Take it, use it, and do what you want.
Okay, thank you. Sure. So, any other comment? Yeah.
Like one way I think we've addressed the funding problem also at Harvest Choice is by making the data public. I think the trend is that our stakeholders and the donor community is becoming more and more informed, and the type of questions we get are becoming more and more sophisticated. So even though we're not charging for access to data, we can charge for analysis and for tools, and it's not just the donor community. In fact, it's the private sector too. So I think the open data, in fact, creates opportunities for us for conducting more, interesting analysis and being able to get revenues from the analysis.
Yes. We have some online audience too.
Alamayes Yumtafasa IFPRI. Perhaps this question has been asked already. I would like to hear the view of the panel regarding the following question. Do you believe these initiatives influence data collection effort in general? For instance, would it dampen incentives to collect data? Something along the lines of the free riding problem, where if others are collecting data, why should I collect data? Would that be a problem? And if you think there is such a problem potentially, how can it be addressed? Thank you.
Okay. Let's collect some questions this time. Okay.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Tarek. I'm from the World Bank. I work with Neil on our own open data initiative. I'm super impressed with the stuff I've heard from IFPRI. It's incredible to see all this stuff. I was only familiar with the Arab spatial work before I came here, but it's great to know about the other stuff too. I have two questions for you. One is, at the bank we often get asked the question, so who uses your data? And we've been doing open data for 3 years, and my response is still, we don't really know, because we don't ask people to register. We get a rough idea of what's going on. But is that something that you've been considering and something that you're going to track? And then the second question is, we have a help desk, so you can email us or you can call us, and we'll help you use our data and answer any questions that you have. And we just launched a kind of online place that people can ask these questions to. And again, I was wondering if you guys had thought about having this kind of help desk function. And I noticed that as an institution you have several data properties, and have you thought about having some sort of central help function for all of these different data properties? Thanks.
Thanks. And the mic, yeah.
I wanted to ask this question when there was a slide on public good for the public good. What if it's a public bad for public bad? My question is about data quality and what your role is, if there is any, in the quality of the data that you put out.
Yeah, very important question. Okay, so one last question.
I'm Rajul Pandyalocha at IFPRI. Twofold question. One is picking up on the data collection, the data quality, and I have the question on data use. How much investment are we making in actually improving the use, improving the way by which the data is used, or are we so much in the business of just making the data available? Where and how do we invest there? And the second question is for Neil from the World Bank. You shared with us some fascinating lessons. And so just be looking further down the road, what do you see coming down the road in terms of problems and opportunities in these big picture lessons? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's start with data free riding issue. Any of the panel has some comment? Yes.
I can attempt to take a few of these. I must say these are fantastic questions, so I'm glad that we have such a well-informed audience here. The free riding problem, I don't know. It's the answer to. I don't really have a great answer for you. I mean, what I do know, and I've been many years in the business, is that there are lots and lots of incentives at work in terms of data collection, and we have to sort of be mindful of them all. One is somebody put a nice slide up earlier, kind of a donor fair, like a donor riding thing. I forget what it was, but donors on On the roller coaster, exactly. And I think many people involved in the data collection business see a lot of incentives from that, and they're pulled in lots of different places. I mean, the one thing I would say about that is that if everybody is making data open, then another of the efficiencies that's been mentioned, you would hope, eventually, will be that duplicative data collection practices will reduce, and there are many of those already. And I think we've seen that. You're all researchers, so we've all seen that kind of thing in the field. But I think it's a complex issue. I think the incentives issue around data collection. So not a great answer, but that's a few remarks on it. Public bad for the public bad. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, we at the bank at least we try to strive for the highest data quality we can, of course, and that's one of the reasons why we started our open data initiative with the World Development Indicators. The sort of second data set which came along was interesting. It's the geocoded data set of the bank's projects. And one of the things that was said when we started with that project was that, oh, this will be really poor data quality. We've got to be really, really careful with this because this is bank's work. And once we start putting a geocode on it, start putting it on a map, people will be there. The first thing we'll see in the press will be somebody standing there with a camera, and they'll be at a project which is to build a school, and they'll be taking a picture of an open field. And this will be very bad for the reputation of the bank and that'll be a data quality issue. But I think what we've seen, in fact, is that by being open, we've managed to improve data quality. And I think that would be my big sort of takeaway, if you like. One of maybe the 11th lesson is that being open can improve your data quality. The more eyes there are on it, the better you will get your data set eventually. Now, that's not to say that this won't be uncomfortable and that there aren't issues around that. I work for a pretty risk-averse place. I don't know what IFPRI is like, but that's what the bank is like. And people do not want to see that kind of photograph of a project which isn't happening. Now, other people would say that's great. That means we can act on that. Maybe that's a data quality issue, or maybe it's a genuine problem with that project. Either way, that's a good thing, because we can improve it. One of the things we did when we launched the Open Data Initiative, we went to the White House and we asked them, because the US had launched an Open Data Initiative, what are the lessons you've learned? You could tell us. And they said, we have a data set on the Recovery Act. So many people know about the Recovery Act. It was a stimulus package after the recession, popular with some, unpopular with others. What the Recovery Act requires is that every contract which is placed as a result of the Recovery Act funding is made openly available. And people immediately, that was put on a map called recovery.gov. The first thing that happened apparently was that when that was released, the press combed through that data set and they found a lot of projects, a lot of contracts let in zip codes which didn't exist. And so they immediately said that's fraud. And that's a waste. That's a bad thing about the Recovery Act. And the White House said, and what happened was that they took the website down, and the White House said that is exactly the wrong thing to do. What you should do is say thank you for this. We'll look into that, and we'll try and improve. Either it's fraud, which is a good thing to know about, or it's a bad data point, which is a good thing to know about. Either way, you can that's improving data quality. So that's one angle on that. I'll come back to the top 10. Maybe I should give others the opportunity to speak before I do that.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Yes, about the data quality and it being a public bad for the public. I'll just continue with what Neil had been saying, is that that's not necessarily a bad thing, and it's very crucial once we start moving from those very bilateral or single focus platforms to the more open data platform, is to identify knowledge gaps. And once we do, we can definitely, I think the whole international community, whose ever data we've worked with, is able to actually identify what the errors are and go ahead and correct them, or even maybe bring together a more multi-organizational platform to agree on certain standards for indicators and for descriptive indicators and others, to identify standards that we can all use. And in terms of producing data, Rajul, for just the sake of producing data and putting it out there, yes, I agree. We have to all, I think, run or at least weigh the risks of, do we just produce the data, and how do we make sure that countries actually use them? For us, for instance, for Arab Spatial, our medium-term plan is not to keep on managing Arab Spatial in the medium to long term. We eventually want to turn it over to other organizations, and once we start developing country-specific atlases, then turn them over to those countries, give them ownership over not just maintaining and updating the atlas or their atlases, but also customizing their atlases, because data and interest in data is a very versatile and very alive thing. So once they take ownership, they can actually customize these atlases to suit their own policy interests. So we're hoping that this comes, and this is actually where we're working on that right now. Actually, the rest of my team members are doing that, just ironing out how we can do this, turn it over to individual countries for them to populate and to customize such atlases. So I think it's a worthy exercise, and but yes, unfortunately, data is messy and it's not pretty and it's not consistent sometimes. But that in itself is important to realize and to work towards addressing.
I would like to answer some of question which you pointed before. In terms of user from the World Bank, actually it's very hard to check who use our open data, but somehow the lesson I've got is actually data itself is useless, because with the data, with the tool, and the other thing is can combine together, make an impact. So I think you can check with the kinds of, you can provide the other tool and then check how people use the tool with data, then it would be a good asset for you. And then help desk, actually for the security portal, we provide a policy dialogue for each developing country. So I think that's a good way to check, and then also based on that policy dialogue, you can provide some kind of help for using the open data and open tool as well. So based on that result, in Food Security Portal, we provide the subsector, the web portal, including Latin America, and Asia, and Africa, so we can give an answer for specific answer for individual region. So that would be a good solution. And for data use, actually from data use, I think that this time is very good, because if we provide the first event of open data, I suggest you keep doing this open event every year, and also provide the hackathon. So we can invite the data scientist who is young people, has a bright idea to make a big application. So we bring them to here and then give our data and question. So they would solve the problem. I think that's another way using the open data. So that's my answer. Thank you.
Okay.
So is this thing on? Okay, there we go. I would also stress, I think the public bad is not an issue. It's the reaction to when someone says that the data you have is bad, is where the negative aspect it isn't. That we all know that the data that we're using isn't perfect, that there's always going to be pieces that are missing. So welcoming the feedback is, I think, essential. We are definitely with the impact team, because we are built on a platform using open databases. We're very interested in hearing from experts in specific fields and countries so that we can improve the data, because if we try to simulate reality and we're using poor data, then our simulation isn't very good. So I think having better data and having people look at it is a public good, and it's the negative is how we would react to it. In terms of how looking at like different types of users, I think that was a really good question, because the type of data and the way that they interact with it changes dramatically with what kind of user. I know with the impact model, we have a variety of different users. We have people who are just sort of interested at looking at the results of the model. So they want to be able to, you know, look at the numbers from spreadsheets, or more often want to be able to look at sort of visualizations that are easy to sort of get summary data. But then we have other people who are a little more interested in being able to run the model themselves, and being able to distinguish between those different types of users is important. And we've been starting to work on this type of problem, and have been developing training materials so that people can learn how to use the model. And even though we haven't launched the web version yet, we're in the process of sort of creating an online course that would allow people who want to use the model will be able to then take sort of the basics of it. They wouldn't be able to code the model, but they would understand how it works, how to use it, and then if they're interested even more, then we can sort of follow up on a more case-by-case basis. But I think that is something that we're certainly struggle a little bit with, and are trying to find how we can provide the data at different levels for users who want to use it and interact with it at different ways.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
I better come back to this direct question about what's next. Somebody was asking that. And I think for us, there's lots of things, of course, we want to do. We want to include more subnational data, for example. I see you've got a lot here, so that maybe we should come across the street more often.
Absolutely.
And talk to you guys. Maybe we should do linked data and RDF data set, make Johannes' job a bit easier. But I think one of the key things that we have to do, and I think we all have to do this, is really help countries with their own capacity, both to collect data, which is a real issue and a constant problem, and one, to help them open up their data as well. And we are working on that. We have a sort of toolkit, and if you hear of any countries who are interested in either opening data, or if they are keen to improve their data capacity, whether it's statistical data capacity or whether it's capacity in other areas of data, I think that's something that we all should try to work on, because in the end a lot of the data we use is coming from countries, of course. This is and so that's really, I think, the and what I hope is that the Open Data Initiative and the momentum we have behind open data can really help us get a bit closer to helping countries, particularly the poorest countries. Thank you.
Okay, one last comment.
Yeah, just to echo Neil's comments on the national capacity, I think we found, looking a little bit over the past year, the type of users and how the spatial data is used on the website. I think we found there's like the GIS skills are not very widely available at the moment. So there is more. We have more requests for data than we have for maps, and that's one of the reasons why we are releasing this this table making tool in addition to the map making tool, because there's still more demand for the data than for the maps. So building, and when there is demand for maps, it's usually just can I copy paste this, copy this map and paste it into a report or something. There's very little demand for spatial analysis. So I think that's one of the building GIS capacity in country is probably something we need to work on as well.
Okay, thank you. Any further? Yes.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I have a question about open data standards, and how you see the evolution of that. Neil, you had a slide with CBS files, HTML files, XML, and then PDF and images and things like that, right? So there's a wide variety of standards we see today, or ways of implementing a so-called open data API, and then you have sort of the balance between over regulation or sort of imposed standards that maybe limit innovation versus something like schema.org or efforts like that. So just wondering how you guys see that evolution and the impact on the open data movement.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not as much of a standards guy as this guy.
I have become always more loose in this. There were yesterday made during the G8 conference 5 points what you are doing: structured data, non-proprietary software, open APIs. What were the other points? If you go to what Tim Berners-Lee has said, this is 5-star, put it on the web, structure it, use non-proprietary software, use RDF as a standard, and then link it to other data sets. So for me, the problems are not so much about the standards. I love RDF, and if everyone would use it, life would become so much easier. But if you use your proprietary formats with an open API, it's always doable. But what is not so easy and not always doable is linking data to each other. Because if you do not have semantic mappings, then you say this refers to a certain topic and this others also, and then to mesh them up, this is a difficulty. So what I think, if you do not refer to some common vocabulary, so these are not technical standards about meaning of things. As example, in statistics, flag systems, if you use them all differently and you don't say this flag is the same as this flag also if it is named in a different way, or multilinguality. Also multilinguality can be much more facilitated through the use of common and shared vocabularies. So I think it's nearly more important, the standard on shared vocabularies and semantics, than the standard on technologies. With this, I don't want to deny that also a bit of standardizing in sample as data formats like RDF would be of big advantage.
I think that's a terrific answer, and I'd agree with everything you said. But I mean, we had an open data conference last year, and a guy called Rufus Pollock, who's regarded as one of the leading thinkers in open data. He's works at the Open Knowledge Foundation, and he said at the end, sometimes standards are fine, but if you've got a really good, clean CSV file that you can understand, people can do a lot with that. And okay, maybe a little more work to link it to things. But I think the real message from me is make it as easy as possible for people to use and understand what you have, and then people can take that and link it to other things if they wish to. People have the capacity to do that. What they don't have is the capacity to understand stuff if you don't give it to them in a way that's understandable. That barrier is much bigger to me than the standards barrier. That's not to say some sort of light, maybe loose standards are useful, but I tend to think very similarly to that.
Can I add some comment? Actually, at the conference, I met Dan from the Google, and he is in charge of the person to create the schema.org. And I think, because I'm very interested in schema.org from 2011, but there are not much change and update yet. So, but I think there is some kind of ongoing the effort to putting every major search engine together and make a schema.org like a common vocabulary. I think that's a good sign. And also in terms of IFPRI or CGIAR, we also have some kind of effort to put like common vocabulary for agriculture, and especially agricultural technology, and then common vocabulary of the crops and genomics. So then kind of effort might have some kind of bring some kind of good result later. But it takes some time though.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of the people here explaining about the things. But the important thing is to open up the data. The tagging is also very important when you're doing the metadata. So that is very important.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from the audience? Or from... okay.
Open data policy, but the countries or organizations where you collected the data from don't have an open data policy. How do you handle that? Do you negotiate with them? Do you just not publish that data?
I was kind of thinking too, because CGIAR centers keep talking about working more with the industry people, and we're also talking about more open data. So and the industry people there's no incentive for them, I guess, to have open data. They've spent a lot of money on collecting their data, and they don't like to share it. So I wonder if anybody has any thoughts on, mashing up the two, open data and working with industry people, such as DuPont or something like that.
I can have a quick stab at this one. Maybe Tariq, who's had some experience with private, firms and data, could say something about that, if you want, Tariq. On the question of doing business with institutions which don't have open data policies, yeah, that's tricky, and of course we face it. The bank, our guiding policy is our access to information policy, which is kind of fairly clear about the situations that occur like that. And in fact, for example, if a country sends us something and says you cannot publish this, we can't publish that, and so we have at least the policy to do that. What we try to do with data is sometimes we can agree with the organization or the country that's provided that we can actually publish that data, but we have to exclude that from our own terms of use. Our own terms of use say, well, you can take that data, as long as you attribute that data to its original source, you can do what you like with it. You can sell it if you want. If that's your business model, you can do that. So we have an exclusions list of institutions and countries where that wouldn't apply. The number of entities on that exclusion list so far after 3 years is precisely 0. And that's because in most cases we've managed to negotiate with them, and usually we can find some kind of accommodation that has made them happy, or sometimes not so happy. But and we're trying inside the bank to have a policy where we have a sort of open by default model for data as well. So if data has been collected as a result of bank resources, then that data, all other things being equal, should be by default open. Now, some of the exclusions to that you can think of. For example, if I collect data from you and I tell you when I collect it that's confidential between you and I, and it won't be used in any other way apart from the ways that I say, then clearly I'm not going to be able to publish that openly. So that's the case with much survey data, and I'm sure you're familiar with those kinds of data sets. We have a sort of 5-tier access policy for survey data because it's complicated and it varies. With microdata, with survey data, we follow the policy of the country where that data was collected, essentially, and we're quite clear about that. And so there's sort of various grayness areas in this data policy. Do you want to say anything about commercial data, Tariq?
I can add one more.
Oh, maybe somebody else can.
IFPRI policy is to make your data as a public good is 2 years after the data collection ceases or before a major publication, like IFPRI research reports or books or journal articles.
Just going to intervene here. I think 2 years is really long. Just to let you know that. After a researcher has collected that, to have that right. IFPRI is a publicly funded institution as well, and I think that's a lengthy period. At the bank, mostly it's 6 months. Just to let you know that.
Okay. So yeah, about the private data, private sector data, Tariq, you can.
You want to use a microphone? So just quickly, the private sector organizations are now actually becoming some of the biggest data producers out there. The 2 examples everyone will have heard of are social networks and mobile phone operators. So social networks now have a huge amount of transactional data on the behavior of consumers and users of their networks. But it's really the private sector that often have better data on the kinds of things that we're worried about than official institutions. I was looking at this a week ago, looking at mobile phone penetration in Latin America. I went to the ITU, who have a certain level of information, but I look at one of the mobile market research firms in the area, or I look at one of the mobile operators, and they have far higher resolution, more up-to-date, granular information on this kind of stuff. There's a guy called Robert Kirkpatrick at the UN who runs UN Global Pulse, and he coined the term data philanthropy, which is the idea that these large organizations can start donating some of this data to the public good for general use. This is an idea that's becoming accepted. Corporations are starting to realize that their data has value in and of itself. Many of them are open to releasing it and sharing it for this kind of use. So I'm not that familiar with the agricultural domain, but I expect there are equivalent examples in this area.
Thank you. Yeah.
Jacques Tennessee, European Commission. I come back to the question, private data, should we pay for it? And I would say that any problem has a solution. And I think that as international organization, we have to pay attention to the fact that maybe we have the power to place the money on the table, recognize that data collection is very expensive, so has to be paid in some way. And maybe somebody has to pay for everybody. I would take the following example about publication. Okay, my organization make some 1,000 peer-review publications per year, and we want to go for open policy. So in fact, what we envisage for next year is to allocate a budget of 3 million euros so that we buy the right to the publication companies. And the discussion we have today is, do we buy at the cost of, the day of publication availability for everyone, or a 6 months delay availability? I don't know what we will decide, but can you believe an entity who has credits of some maybe 50 million euros yearly is envisaging to put on the table 3 million euros so that his publication, so the output, are available freely for everybody. It's the same with data, to my opinion.
Yes.
Just relating to that point about funding the data collection, we're very lucky at ASTI to have Gates as a primary donor who sees the value in that primary data, and our other donors as well, USDA and the Canadian government, and they see that just the data collection itself, it's a very painstaking process. It requires resources, and they're willing to fund that. They're not just, many donors like to use this primary data for monitoring and evaluation, for many different reasons, but actually funding that data collection is very important. And it's not that easy. Sometimes people say, oh, you can just estimate it, or, find a quicker way to do it. And the reality we found is that when you actually do the surveys, you can come up with a very different picture than if you estimated it. And so that relates to that data quality issue as well. And just in terms of data use, going back to Rajul's question, we're actually working with our national partners to set up a data management portal where they will be able to access all of their data that they've collected and then use it for their own purposes. So they will have full access to all the data, and hopefully it will contribute to the greater use within the country. But it's certainly something we struggle with as well, how you can't just collect the data. You also have to look at the other side and see how it can be used.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so any more hands? So thank you very much for all the speakers came to IFPRI and giving this excellent talk and inspiring us to the new world of open data, especially for Neil and Johannes came to us sharing all this good talk. Thank you very much. And thanks also goes to the Communication and Knowledge Management Division for organizing all this beautiful event. And hopefully we can keep doing it for as a side event whenever there is an opportunity. And also Toastmaster International, who keeps speakers on time, and we had a harsh training of our speakers yesterday to make beautiful visuals and slides, and so yeah, everything worked great. And thank you to be here and to be on person, and also our online audience. I've been following this Twitter feed. It's amazing. A lot of our conversation here is getting picked up and shared around the world. So this is another good model of sharing knowledge and information. So this is pretty good model for our future similar events at IFPRI and also for our center. So thank you very much for everyone. Hope to see you again in similar event in near future. Thank you.